Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast this week, the show where software engineers, tech leaders, and talent acquisition specialists tune in to see what's happening with the world of hiring, technology, job searching, and beyond. Today on the podcast, we're speaking with Matt about CVs, about interviews, about hiring, about culture, and beyond, all in this episode of the podcast.
The Alfie Whattam podcast.
So Matt, thanks for coming on. Give people a little bit of an intro, mate. Who are you? Where do you work? What's your background? Give people some context.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm currently the head of tech recruiting at Deliveroo, and I'm also doing some moonlighting in my role as well as the current HR director for the tech org. I've been there 8 months. Got a team based globally, UK, some spread throughout Europe, and then in India as well. I've been in recruiting leadership for quite a long time. Unfortunately, going back about 12, 14 years at this point. Started my career in recruiting in the agency world, like many other folks do. Quickly transitioned to the corporate world and the tech side at a healthcare IT company, and then ended up getting to Monster.com as a senior recruiter and was quickly able to kind of grow into a leadership role as the head of recruitment at Monster. Moved to another small startup that has a heavy UK presence, Mimecast, which is security, IT security, and then did some stints at the bigger orgs of Meta, mostly supporting leadership hiring for the product teams, and then settled at Amazon, where I led consumer recruiting for the tech org across EMEA and international.
Awesome. Cool. Well, look, lots of big brands there, and all companies where we've interviewed people on the podcast before. We've had engineering leaders from Mimecast, we've had CTOs from Meta and Amazon, and even from Deliveroo, we've had I think it's Rama Javed, who's one of your heads of directors of engineering, I believe. Always keen to speak to new and familiar faces. So that's your background, lots of experience in tech recruitment. So there's definitely a lot that you can give on the subject of CVs, because you must have seen thousands of software engineers' resumes over the past number of years. What advice would you give, Matt, for developers putting together a CV? What are the red flags to avoid? What are the good things they should include? What do you see time and time again, and recommendations that you would give to a developer listening or watching to this?
I think the whole CV world has had such an enormous evolution since I was actually last a recruiter. And I actually kind of feel the way that recruiters are able to interact with candidates via CVs is actually a lot more limited than I think candidates might think. And so I remember when I was a recruiter last, we had Career Builder, we had Monster.com, we had Indeed. And so you actually could go on there. People would upload their resumes to these websites. For those who are young enough that don't know this, you can actually upload a physical CV onto the website. A recruiter would be able to create what we call a Boolean string, which is just basically a keyword search, and come up with, a list of candidates, and you'd see their full CV. So CV writing used to be super important, like how you wrote it, what you wrote, what you were referencing. All that stuff became like important to be selected to go into an organization.
Yeah.
Fast forward to now, recruiters don't really have access to CVs that often, right? A statistic I had from my time at Facebook, now Meta, of all the hires of the engineers we made, 99% of them were sourced by a recruiter. So that means it was basically like 0.9% of people that physically applied, meaning they sent a CV in, didn't even get reviewed or hired.
Oh, wow.
So in that case, having a strong CV wouldn't help somebody, right? And so, the value of LinkedIn has obviously exacerbated the capabilities of CV writing. Tools such as GitHub, Stack Overflow have obviously given an additional source for recruiters to actually go find candidates and also, find people that align to their code base and what they're looking for. But I don't want to then steer this conversation that don't look at your CV at all. So where does the CV really matter? In the interview, right? So, obviously at selection, getting in the door, it's more important to have a strong LinkedIn presence, a good Stack Overflow, GitHub presence, operationally efficient on team blinds, so making sure that you're spending time doing your research on some of the crowd-share websites of information. I think that's where, from a selection perspective, you want to have a higher degree of accuracy And what you see on LinkedIn with engineers is they just put software engineer, right? And so, recruiters end up doing this mass amount of work to like go and reach out to a bunch of people, get them into conversations, figure out what they actually do, what their code base is, what their specialty is, front end, back end, etc. And so, I'd encourage you to make sure that you're, adding projects underneath your LinkedIn job title and the company you're working for, just to make sure that people can go out and find you and actually can locate exactly what you're doing. And hopefully that aligns better with what the company's looking to hire for. We're starting to see more niche specialties in engineering now, right? And, you have Kubernetes all the way to, your basics of Python, Java, and C, right? And so like the more specialized the code base gets and the more specialized the projects within teams get, especially with AI, generative AI, infrastructure, things like that, security, like, it's important for people to know what kind of specialty you actually have and what specialty you're learning towards, right? On systems like HackerRank or Fidelity, they have coding universities, right? So what's your badge scores on those, right? But then when we actually get to your physical CV, when you're sitting with the manager that's potentially going to hire you, or a panel of interviewers that's going over, a code review or something like that, or behavioral interview, it's important to kind of identify things in a smart format, right? If we think about like a situation, what's measurable, what's actionable, what's reportable, what's tangible. If we think of like, if you're presenting a case to somebody and you want to see what you actually accomplished at the organization, make sure you have some tangible KPIs that you improve, reduction in release times, or whatever you might want to call out as something that you particularly had part of impacting. Because oftentimes it's just a series of things that you did and things that you were part of doing, but it's nothing like in terms of like what your considerable impact was as part of that team. So try to be as specific as you can be, make sure you have things that are measurable, make sure that you show how you could iterate and how you could build off something that you started. And then, what happens at the end, right? So what did you achieve? What did you learn? What guided you? And I think having that level of specificity ensures that somebody reading it can relate to you quicker in terms of like how you fit in that organization.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with that. Most LinkedIn pages are like a tenth of the CV, but they often get read and valued more than the actual resume itself, because you're right, gone are the days of you apply to a job and then you wait to see what happens. Most of the time recruiters are now going after people on LinkedIn and other platforms. So you need to make sure that you've got that page just as good quality as the time that you invest into the CV. And you're right, the way to do that is by, detail. It's about, providing links to your stack, to your GitHub, to your projects, making quantifiable results and not just writing as your bullet point, hey, I was a developer and I was writing code. No, that's not good. You need to write, look, I'm a senior, React and Java specialist. I've got 7 years in fintech. Here's 3 projects that I've done. That is way better than just like keeping it like super vague. So I'd certainly agree with what you said there on CVs, Matt, and people that follow that advice will instantly start to see their CV to interview like ratio and more people contact them skyrocket, right?
This podcast is brought to you by WeLoveAlpha.com. If you're looking to grow and hire and scale your software engineering team in the UK, then go to WeLoveAlpha.com to hire the best software developers on the market. Everything across Java to C# to PHP to Python to React and Angular and mobile and more. Go to WeLoveAlpha.com to hire the best software engineers in the UK now.
But what about like stage 2? Because like you have referenced interviews there. What about like after they've got the interview? Like what tips would you give to candidates that are going through like the interview journey and trying to get the offer?
The interview journey at almost every single company in the world is this weird black box, right? And so when you come into them, right, I think you have to be prepared for quite a litany of questions and quite a litany of different stages of things you go to, from role plays to coding assessments to whiteboarding exercises to architecture conversations. And so, to have like a one size fits all approach in terms of how you do that is almost impossible, right? But I think there's a few things that you can rely on. A is really push on your recruiter to make sure they give you a proper prep, right? And if you don't understand, if you don't understand the structures and the frameworks of the interview, right, really push your recruiter help to create that clarity. I think at Amazon, you look at some of the terms they use and how they interview, and it's actually quite clear and easy to kind of go through. So if people are going to Amazon, it's hard to figure out how to get hired, but it's easier to figure out how to interview. But like, eliminate stuff like weasel words, what they call it, right? So like, nearly all our customers benefited from this result, and like put a percentage, 35% of customers saw an improvement of it. Make sure you're backing up your subjects with data. So, like we talked about the CVs, what things did you impact? What things did you particularly impact as part of the team that you were the innovator for? And then make sure you're vocally self-critical. I looked at things that, we did, and I, thought about it in retrospect, and we identified areas of improvement.
Yeah.
And don't have that edge of like, I did such an amazing job that it was the best thing I've ever created. And, always have that edge of, self-criticality to link back. Like there's things we could have done better. I think companies always want to have constant iteration in the employees they have. But, you need to take the time to think about the examples from the companies you worked at to present before you actually go and do it. Otherwise, you're just going to kind of reactively answer a question. You're probably going to miss, the salient points you want to get across. And that's generally what leads to people saying, well, this person's not at the bar. Yeah. Maybe you actually were at the bar. You just didn't answer the question correctly. Also, don't be afraid to make them rephrase the question. Oftentimes, especially for engineering interviews, some of them are quite clear and easy, right? You do a coding interview, you do a coding review interview, you're basically explaining and walking through how you did it. But when you do that, explain like where you were going, because in a coding assessment, it's like a very small subset of what you actually would do in the role. It's just, do you know how to like write a language, basically, and can it produce a nominal result? But, when you're doing the code review conversation, describe like where you would go with this, right? So where you would take this, given you had 6 months of time, right? So that basic code set you built, what is that going to build at the end? And things like the role plays, right? The questions end up becoming these very opaque behavioral based questions. Tell me about a time when, things like that. And so those are where you really need to be the most thoughtful, where it's like, think about how you interact with your peers. Think about how you communicate, think about how you influence others, think about how that impacts delivery, think about how you retrospect on that and iterate on that. And make sure you have that complete picture, within the SMART framework, right? What's actionable and measurable and specific, right? And think about those frameworks to really guide you towards how you'd answer those questions, right? Because if they can see that you have a holistic thought process, that you can take something from inception to completion with iteration and working through others and delivering through others and using communication and influence, that's generally we see candidates come out with, you're above the bar, or, maybe you're level below where you should be. We need to level you up, right? And so I think a lot of people do a disservice to themselves that are very good engineers simply by not taking the time to prep and plan to interview well.
Yeah, I mean, the preparation, the research, prior work, will set you apart from everybody else that clearly hasn't done it, because it's obvious when somebody hasn't done that. But there's something in particular that you mentioned there, Matt, around kind of like being self-reflective and critical, and I think that's really, really key, because so many times developers going into an interview and they'll like pretend to be an expert with every technology that they've touched for 5 minutes, and it comes out pretty quickly when that person isn't honest, and you have a much better shot of just getting the job if you just go, look, I'm really great in these 3 areas, I need to be better in these areas, but here's what I'm doing to improve in them, and then giving examples. That will make you way better than somebody else that just pretends to be the greatest and then gets caught out pretty quickly, as often is the case.
What I've always hated is like the coding ninja, the Jedi, because what that kind of gives somebody coming into an interview is the expectation that you're supposed to be perfect. And like when you present it that way, when a recruiter's presenting it that way, or you're getting that presented like that in an interview, and you make a mistake, let's say in your coding assessment, even if it's a small syntax error, it's nothing major, you're not going to be apt to like look at that yourself before the CR starts to say like, crap, I messed that up, right? Because you're supposed to be a Jedi, or you're supposed to be a ninja, or you're supposed to be whatever other weird terms nowadays. Unicorn, yeah. And so, don't have the mentality going in. If you see that, call it out. Say, hey, I made this syntax error. If I did this adjustment, it would have had this result, and this was the plan of where I was going with it. So I think that message lands better, right? In the interview process specifically. And, although companies present themselves as they want the unicorns and the specialties of the world. They really don't. What they want is like good engineers that can work as part of a cross-functional team in probably a complicated environment that, they might say they're waterfall or they're agile or they're Kanban, but they're not. They're an aggregation of all those things together. And sometimes the product roadmap's not perfect. And like, all the things that happen when you start is 100% different than what you think going in, right? You might think Amazon's got this perfect engineering roadmap. It's like they don't, right? And so, likewise, as a candidate, we really don't expect perfection either. Like we really expect you to have an expertise and a specialty, but what we always used to say years ago, the soft skills, I don't know what they call them now, but behavioral competencies or whatever new terminology we have now, like that's the piece that really gets people hired more so than, if you're 2% better at coding than somebody else, being able to be the person that can communicate well, that can help influence others, that's willing to operate cross-functionally, that's willing to like solve problems outside their role. Like these are things that companies look for more so than, the ninjas and the unicorns.
I mean, what is like a ninja? I mean, it's got nothing to do with development. I was having this conversation with a friend of mine who invests in mainly like AI and machine learning companies, and he was saying like if you was to actually hire a coder rock star, what is a rock star? They're drunk all the time, they show up late, they cause like chaos. Like I don't want that in my company. I want somebody who can do the job really, really, really well. So yeah, like be careful with those terms, but okay. What about the flip side of the coin, Matt? Like we talked interview tips there for people trying to get a job. What about for companies trying to get top talent? Because it's not just about trying to impress a company. It's also about trying to impress candidates about why they should work for you. Because good developers have got choices, right? So what advice would you give to hiring managers when trying to streamline interviews, when trying to sell the position, when trying to attract the right people? What tips would you give to engineering leaders and CTOs and recruiters on that side of the coin?
I think the biggest error I've seen throughout my whole career with tech is an unrealistic expectation of what a role is, right? And so they usually become super customized to their organization. The big orgs do this really well, right? So like the Metas and the Amazons, they've built a standard, right? Like the Amazon has the bar of a level 5 software development engineer, right? And so there's a particular bar that's cross-functional across the entire organization. If you get an offer in the UK for a level 5 software engineering role and you decide not to take it, that offer's valid for 6 months, and you could go to the US and just immediately get a job, right? And so they have a standard bar, and that's great. But we're not Amazon, and we're not Meta, and we're not Google, and most companies aren't, right? And so they're relying on their HR business partners, or relying on their compensation teams to come up with the framework for their roles. And what happens is they turn into these Frankenstein roles, right? So all of a sudden you have a back-end engineer role that all of a sudden is now doing platform engineering and mobile development, and that becomes the role they're recruiting for because Susie Smith was a back-end engineer when she started. Now she took on platform engineering tasks, and now she took on mobile tasks, and then she does this amalgamation, and they try to hire these amalgamated roles. So, be realistic as to what the market looks like, and the only way you can do that is to work with your recruiters to do, market analysis, to do talent insights reviews, to help understand, like, okay, I have this role, can we hire it in the market, or do we need to segment it and look at what's capable? Second piece is really like looking at your selection criteria and your calibration, right? Do you feel like the people that are actually doing the conversations are qualified enough to actually make the decision you want to make, right? Mm-hmm. We don't want people to make a decision based on, do I like you? Can we work together? As much as like, is this person somebody that fits within our culture, with the bounds of how our team operates, within our operating principles, can align to our tenants, and then can align to the mission that we're trying to achieve as a team. And so oftentimes with smaller orgs, what you see is a lack of focus on building mission, vision, values, tenants, operating principles. And so it's just, again, in somebody's head. Different leaders will view it differently. So be pretty specific with that on your teams. So this is like way in the front of before you even think about hiring, right?
Sure.
And so, once you actually get to the spot where you figure these things out, when you're branding, right? The number one brand for any company is their name, right? And who they are, right? Employment brands, I've been on and off of for the better half of 12 years. I was at monster.com. I should be a brand expert at this point. But, how many people go and look at your videos on LinkedIn, right? A lot of people do, but it's not your highest percentage of hiring. Your highest percentage of hiring comes from your recruiters. Let's be honest. It's supposed to be 30% recruiter, 30% branding, 30% referrals, and the rest are coming from an amalgamation of social media. So, the big thing with the brand piece is, make sure you're fishing in the right ponds. And that really comes down to understanding the roles. Make sure you have them calibrated correctly. Once you get that, then you can start fishing in the right ponds, right? So you know where you're looking for, who you're looking for, what kind of skill set you're looking for. And then from there, it's really about your process. What kind of experience are you creating with the people that are interviewing? Starbucks did a review back in 2009, basically on their canned experience. So they found out they had such a low canned experience score. They wanted to figure out what was going on. So they actually implemented a question that said, like, would you purchase our product based on your experience as a candidate? And a large enough portion said no. They compared that portion against the average spend in the US for a Starbucks customer, which is $458. And they realized they were potentially losing out on $30 million of revenue because they had a really crap experience. And so, if you're losing that, and 30, somebody could do the math on here quicker than I. That's probably what, couple, 300,000-400,000 candidates, maybe a few million candidates. Like, how many of those were somebody that could be the next CTO, or how many of those would be the next product leader, right? And so focusing on the experience you're giving is going to be important. But when you are using branding affects, right, it has to be employee-based content, right? Engineers don't want to hear from somebody that works on a marketing team about how cool their job is and how many coffees they went to get or whatever. What they really want to see is engineers working as part of a team that are executing on a task and being able to speak about their experience of doing that. And so your branding should be specific to the groups you're trying to support. If you're trying to hire marketing, use your marketing resources. If you're trying to hire engineers, use your engineering resources, and make sure you're promoting that employee-based content, because beautiful, cool videos of your office are great, but we're starting to not see the value of that. Obviously, COVID had a huge impact. Remote work, is more important now. Hybrid work, super important now. And so, if you don't have these capabilities and you're showcasing how cool your office is and you have a bar in your office, people don't care about that as much right now. And so, focus in on like the impact somebody's going to have, what they're going to be able to achieve for themselves as a career, and stop having that, company cockiness of like, you have to work for us because we are the place to be. If that's your message, then it should be because you're going to grow your career, because you're going to have the opportunity to work on impactful work, because you're going to be able to be stretched further here than you can be in other places. Because let's be honest, we still all do this because of money, right? I'm not a CEO, right? A lot of engineers that are going to listen to this are not CEOs yet. So we are still paying our bills. And I think that becomes an allergic statement to make. People get nervous around that. But it's like, we're asking people to come in and offer us their time. And what we're giving them back is money. Sure. And so we want to utilize that to the best of the ability. So showcase that and how you brand.
Yeah, I love what you mentioned around employees helping to do the recruitment, because if you pay a ton of money for a fancy video talking about how, hey, we give free fruit on Fridays or whatever the crazy thing is, and then you can put paid spend on that, that's going to still get a lot less views than some head of engineering taking a selfie of his team on a night out, having a great time together and talking about how two of them have just been promoted and being given salary increases. Because you're right, people at the end of the day, they need to be paid for their work, and companies often forget that because we give your annual birthday off or something silly, right? So you're right, with COVID, I find that a lot of the authenticity and genuineness of just what people actually want has really risen to the top, rather than like the corporate side of all those fancy gimmicks kind of they're fading away, and the fakeness, people can see through it. It's not working as much as it used to. So it's certainly resonated.
I find it funny that I'm old enough now where Monster, when I worked there, Monster.com, they were the 454th ever registered.com.
Oh, wow.
So, if you think of like who's left from that mix, Monster, Google, you know, a few others, right? You know, and so like original .com companies, right? They don't, you know, like, not a lot of them exist. Why don't they exist? They didn't evolve, right? And so, you know, Monster even got to the failing end of that at my time there, where they got bought out and kind of got amalgamated. But Google's kind of like the last one standing, right? But I remember, obviously, at Monster, they and Google were the first companies that did the open office floor plan, that did the coffees in the office, the lunches in the office. And then now, fast forward to today, and the Googles, Microsofts, Amazons, Metas of the world, those benefits are slipping, right? And they're fading. They're not replacing them with anything. In fact, I saw an article the other day that Facebook's architecture team or Meta's architecture team is currently redesigning the cubicle, right? So we're kind of going backwards a little bit in working style. So, you know, if you're not one of them and you don't promote that kind of infrastructure with your organization, you know, showcase that you are still an innovative organization that's striving to become, you know, the next cutting edge piece, because your employees are able to do X.
Okay, awesome. Well, let's finish off with, I suppose, why Deliveroo? You know, why should people be interested in checking out you guys? And I'm sure you got a careers page. So software developers are obviously our audience. So, you know, tell us a little bit about that side. Maybe if you know what stack you work with and what technologies you look for, that could be worth mentioning. But yeah, to tell us a little bit about like engineering life at Deliveroo and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So obviously, coming from a really large org to a small org has its share of like concerns that you'd have. You know, and I've done this size org before. And one of the things I really missed when I was working in big org was you get so large of an incredible degree of autonomy. You know, when you work at an Amazon or a Meta size organization, you know, everything's waterfall, regardless of what they say, right? You're not making decisions on how to drive the product forward. But you know, what I've seen at Deliveroo is like individual teams are creating, and individuals themselves are able to create, build, and execute and implement feature sets that actually have huge improvements on the business. I'll give you an example. Last night, and I didn't even know this, I actually had a chat with our CTO this morning and I found out more details on it. But a random engineer just put some time in with his team, and they basically built a tracker that now lives on your lock screen of your phone, right? Okay. Just something out of the blue. It just popped up, was a quick project, just done and dusted and move on, right? That was like a single person that was able to go and think through that, build that, work with the team to execute on that and get it to market, right? There wasn't an elongated approval process. There wasn't, you know, this huge product review session that required it to get there. So, you know, the levels of autonomy are super important. From a tech stack perspective, I'm not going to be the best one to walk through the exact specific tech that we work through. You know, but we are working on a lot of interesting features as an organization, things around like hyperlocal, things around, you know, ensuring that we can broaden our portfolio, you know, grocery, and that space is a huge one for us to get into, and integrating with our partners, you know, the Sainsbury's, co-ops of the world, right? Making sure we're integrating with them. So, you know, getting into the ad space, right, which I think is always interesting to produce a new revenue stream and comes with its core set of challenges. So there's a lot of big, interesting problems that we're solving for right now. And, you know, I think what we've seen is, you know, in smaller companies like Deliveroo has been historically, small to medium-sized companies, they're always trying to hire more senior than they need to. And now we're really focusing on making sure we're finding people that are going to come in and create new innovation, right? Gen AI is, you know, a new big thing that as an organization we're focused on. We may or may not have full expertise in the company to do that, right? And let's be honest, how many Gen AI engineers are out there right now that are actually
not many? A lot of people pretending.
None of them, right? So that's people that are coming fresh out of university, right? People that are coming fresh out of school. These are the people that are going to have the indication of actually how to utilize this kind of technology. So the opportunity curve is really big. Right now, you know, we're significantly under our market cap still. There's still a ton of work to be done as an organization, and you'll get that autonomy to do that at a company like Deliveroo, and you're going to be able to get the space to actually grow and like hopefully give a good leapfrog to your career, which is what I see on companies like this.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Matt. Good to get your perspective for people looking for work, people looking to hire. Hopefully there's some insights that could be of benefit there. So thanks all for tuning in, and I will see you next week.
Cheers.
Hey, thanks for watching this podcast. Make sure that you like, subscribe, follow, comment, etc., etc. And I'll see you in the next episode.